Help. Are you okay? The knock was barely louder than the storm, but it carried the weight of a life breaking open. The rancher took her in without questions, never knowing the name she would whisper would be the one name he had spent years trying to bury. January, 1887. Winter tore across the frontier highlands with no mercy left in it. Rain slashed sideways like gravel hurled by an angry hand, thunder split the sky wide open, and the wind bent the pines circling a lone ranch house perched on a desolate plateau, making the old logs groan as though the land itself were warning anyone foolish enough to draw near. Inside the cabin, Colt Remington sat alone beside a hearth long gone cold. No fire burned there anymore. It had been years since he allowed one to last through the night. The weak glow of dying embers flickered across his weathered face, carving shadows into lines already etched deep by war and grief. Once, he had been a cavalry officer, decorated, respected, a man who believed in command, loyalty, and the quiet promise that brothers came home together. That man disappeared the night his younger brother, Asher Remington, died in what the army called a failed ambush, though Colt knew in his bones it had not been chance. Since that night, he had pulled himself out of the world piece by piece. He trusted no one. He kept his doors barred, his lanterns dark, and his memories buried where they could not bleed him dry. The knock came without warning, 3 light raps against the door, not strong, but urgent, desperate. Colt went still. His fingers closed around the revolver at his hip, thumb resting on the worn grip. No one came out here. Not in daylight. Not ever in a storm like this. He waited, listening past the thunder until it came again, 3 uneven knocks, weaker now, as if the hand making them was losing strength. Slowly, Colt rose and crossed the room, opening the door with the gun hidden behind his leg. A woman stood on the porch, soaked through, dark hair plastered to her face, rain streaming down hollowed cheeks. Her eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion, her lips blue with cold. Blood seeped through torn fabric at her shoulder. She clutched a small canvas satchel in both arms, pressing it to her chest as if letting go would finish her. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind, and then her knees gave out and she folded forward. Colt caught her just in time. For one heartbeat, he hesitated, rain soaking into his sleeves, the weight of a stranger sagging in his arms. She could be trouble. She could be bait. She could be exactly the thing he had spent 6 years avoiding. But something older than fear moved him. He carried her inside and laid her gently on the bench near the hearth. Her skin was ice cold. He stripped off her soaked coat, revealing the wound in her shoulder, crude and hastily bound. Without a word, he cleaned it, wrapped it again as best he could. She never woke, but even unconscious, her fingers stayed locked around the satchel. He didn't pry it loose. Instead, he pulled a dry blanket over her, removed her wet boots, and stood there longer than he meant to, watching her shallow breaths fog the air. From a shelf long untouched, he took down the storm lantern, the only one he had kept after snuffing out all the others. It had been Asher's, given years ago with a grin and a foolish promise to always come home. Colt lit it. The soft amber glow filled the room, pushing back shadows he had lived with for years. He set it beside her and said nothing. The storm raged through the night. Near midnight, the woman stirred, brow tightening, body twitching as if caught in unseen hands. Broken words slipped from her lips between shallow breaths. "Do not trust them." A pause. A shudder. Asher said not to. Tears slid from the corners of her eyes. Colt leaned closer, heart hammering. "Asher," he murmured, but she sank back into restless stillness, leaving only rain and the lantern's low hiss to answer him. By morning, the storm weakened into a cold drizzle. Colt stood at the stove stirring thin soup when he heard movement behind him. The woman was awake, sitting up slowly, eyes scanning the room, one hand instantly finding the satchel at her side. Her gaze landed on Colt, wary and guarded. He turned fully then, studying her. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened on the bag. She swallowed, weighing every word. "I need to find someone," she said, and then, barely above a whisper, "Asher Remington." The spoon slipped from Colt's hand and clattered against the stove. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single name, the one he had tried to bury, the one that still split him open every night. He stared at the woman who had dragged his past straight into his home. The door he had sealed for years had been forced open. "Where did you hear that name?" Colt snapped, his voice suddenly sharp enough to cut stone. She flinched, sitting straighter, still pale, still clutching the satchel. Her lips parted, but no sound came. After a long moment, she reached inside the bag and pulled out a folded bundle of papers, hands trembling as she set them on the table. Colt didn't take them right away. The storm outside was nothing compared to the thunder rising in his chest. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "My name is Margot Ellis," she said. This belonged to Asher. At the top of the stack lay several weathered letters, yellowed and soft at the edges, but one stood out, a sealed envelope addressed in handwriting Colt would never forget. "If I don't make it." His breath caught. He picked it up like it might explode. "He gave it to me 3 days before he died," Margot said. "Told me to keep it hidden. Said he couldn't trust anyone else." "Why you?" Colt asked. "I was a field nurse," she replied. "He came in with a minor wound. Stayed 3 days. The night before he left, he said something was wrong, that someone high up was feeding information to the other side." Colt's eyes never left her. "He said if anything happened to him, I had to find you. That you'd understand what he left behind." Colt opened the letter slowly, every muscle tight. Inside were 3 pages. He read in silence, jaw hardening, until the last line stopped him cold. "Only Colt will know what this means. It's the same code we made when we were kids in the old barn." He sank into a chair. This wasn't something that could be faked. Still, he didn't let her see the shift inside him. He folded the letter and stood. "You can stay," he said. "For now." Margot let out a breath she'd been holding. She didn't thank him. Outside, the storm had passed, but inside, another had begun. He laid down rules, sharp and final. She followed them without protest. At night, Colt went through Asher's old files, comparing every word she'd spoken to memory. Each time something aligned, fear clenched tighter. Margot kept busy, mended his coat, cooked quiet meals, fed the horses without being asked. One morning, he watched her struggle with a bucket at the well until her injured shoulder failed. Without a word, he took over. "Next time ask," he said gruffly. That night, she found a pouch of dried herbs beside her bed with a note signed "Only C." She said nothing, but something eased in her eyes. Days passed like that, small exchanges, quiet understanding growing in the spaces between words. Then word came from town. A man was asking questions. Late 20s woman, wounded shoulder. Margot knew the name before it was spoken. Lieutenant Gaines. By the time Colt returned, she was packed. "You're leaving," he said. "He's here," she answered. "I won't bring this to your door." Colt stepped closer. "You trusted Asher," he said. "Now trust me." The fight drained out of her. She set the bag down. That night, Colt saddled 2 horses. The past had caught up, and neither of them would run from it anymore. The morning they rode out, frost still clung to the low grass, and the air carried the brittle quiet that comes before something breaks. Colt didn't say much as he tightened the cinch on Margot's saddle, his movements precise, practiced, the habits of a soldier waking from a long sleep. They avoided the main road, cutting east through pine and ravine, riding hard until the land dropped away into Redwater Canyon where an old cabin clung to the bluff like it had been forgotten by time. An elderly man answered the door, spectacles slipping down his nose, squinting until recognition sparked. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, then laughed dryly. Colt Remington. Need a favor, Davis, Colt said. You still know how to read a dead man's secrets? Davis Keene did. Once a military attorney, sharp as a blade, he'd walked away from courtrooms after a scandal that nearly cost him his life. He owed Colt, and more than that, he had nothing left to protect. By the stove's warmth, Davis studied Asher's letter, turning pages slowly, tracing margins, eyes narrowing. This isn't forged, he said at last. And if half of this is true, someone's been burying bodies with paperwork. He looked at Margot. You're brave, Miss Ellis. And hunted. While Davis worked, Colt sent word through a telegraph line he hadn't touched in years, calling in an old debt from a former scout turned bounty tracker. He didn't say it aloud, but Margot knew. This was no longer curiosity. It was justice, or vengeance, or truth, whatever survived at the end. When they rode back to the ranch, the air between them felt different. Not lighter, but shared. That night, she met his eyes in the hallway. You didn't have to believe me. I didn't, he said. But Asher did. It took Davis nearly a full day to unlock the final layers. Codes within codes, a cipher buried so deep it might as well have been invisible. When he laid the last page flat, his face went pale. There are names here, he said quietly, reading them aloud. Captain Elias Morse. Major Heath Harland. Lieutenant Silas Gaines. Not suspicions. Evidence. Redirected routes, falsified orders, ambushes that only made sense when betrayal filled in the gaps. At the bottom, a signature. Brigadier General L.T. McHenry. Colt stood by the window, staring at melting snow. Davis turned the page again, revealing a cipher key and a symbol. Colt stepped forward, hands shaking, pulling an old field book from his coat. The symbols matched. It's mine, he whispered. Asher used our childhood cipher. His voice broke. Margot moved without thinking, placing her hand over his. He didn't pull away. He tried to save everyone, Colt said. And they silenced him. What now? Davis asked. We take it to Fort Banner, Colt replied. Someone there still holds court authority. He looked at Margot. You in? She didn't hesitate. I won't run again. They never reached Fort Banner the easy way. The mountain road narrowed just before the gates when Colt's instincts flared. Down, he shouted, dragging Margot from her saddle as a rifle cracked. Shots tore through brush. Colt rolled behind a boulder, blood darkening his shirt. 3 riders appeared on the ridge. The man in the middle wore a gray coat and a familiar sneer. Gaines. Still playing hero, he called. Colt growled back, pain burning through his side. You were always a coward. Gaines raised his hand. 2 rifles aimed. Then a shot rang out from behind Colt. One of Gaines's men fell. Colt turned to see Margot standing, revolver shaking in her hands, eyes steady. Together they scrambled up the ridge, exchanging fire. When it ended, Gaines was cornered, bleeding, desperate. That letter will bring down more than me, he spat. Colt stepped closer. Then let it. A whistle echoed below. Davis rode in with a federal patrol. Within the hour, Gaines was shackled, bound for trial. The storm had finally passed. Colt sat on the wagon's tailgate, breathing hard. Margot wrapped his coat tighter. Below them, the valley glowed gold in the setting sun. You saved me, Colt said. We saved each other, she answered. She handed him a folded sketch of 2 brothers in uniform. He talked about you, she whispered. Colt closed his eyes. We did it, Ash. The truth had a name now. And so did the beginning of healing. Spring came slow to the high plains, but it came all the same. Snow bled into dark earth, and wildflowers clawed their way through thawed soil like stubborn promises kept. Birds returned to the pines, cautious at first, then bold, and with them came sound again, hooves, laughter, the low murmur of life settling where silence once ruled. Margot stood on the porch of the old barn, now changed beyond recognition. Long tables filled the space where hay once lay, chalk slates leaned against rough-hewn walls, shelves crowded with worn books donated by travelers and soldiers who passed through. Her voice carried clear and steady as she pointed to letters scratched in white. "All right, little wranglers. C is for courage. T is for trust." 8 children repeated after her, some barefoot, some wide-eyed, all safe. Outside, horses snorted softly in the sun. A short distance away, Colt leaned against a post, arms crossed, watching. The ranch had changed too. Once a place that shut the world out, it now opened its doors. Old soldiers passing through, ranch hands between jobs, drifters with tired eyes, all found food, a roof, and if needed, a quiet place to set down what weighed on them. It wasn't charity. It was continuity. It was what Asher would have done. That evening, the fire crackled low. Margot sat beside Colt on the porch steps, stars blinking awake overhead, the night warm enough to sit without coats. They hadn't spoken much all day. They didn't need to. Colt handed her a mug of tea. She took it, then said softly, eyes fixed on the sky, "He brought me to you." Colt turned his head slightly. "Asher," she continued. "I thought I was running from something. But really, I was running toward this." Colt didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and went inside, returning with a small wooden frame. Inside it, preserved behind glass, was Asher's letter, creased and stained but intact. "I couldn't bury him," Colt said quietly. "Not really. But this helps." He hung the frame on the wall near the window where morning light would touch it every day. When he turned back, Margot was watching him, tears bright but steady. "I never thought I'd stay anywhere again," she whispered. Colt crossed the room, his voice low and honest. "I never thought I'd let anyone in." He touched her face gently, rough hand warm. "I used to think love was something you had once and lost forever." She drew in a breath. "Now." He met her eyes. "Now I know it can knock twice." He kissed her then, slow and certain, like opening a door that had been locked for years but never forgotten. Mornings on the ranch took on a rhythm after that. At sunrise, before the first rooster crowed, Margot would knock softly on the kitchen door. "Breakfast's ready, Colonel." Colt would grin, tug on his boots, and call back, "Never liked that title, but for you, I'll wear it." The old lantern still hung above the porch. It was never blown out anymore, not because the night was dark, but because light had become habit. One knock had once saved a life. Now, it began every day of the life they built together. Out on the frontier, stories weren't just made of grit and gunfire. They were made of second chances, of quiet bravery, of doors opened when it would have been easier to keep them shut. And sometimes, they were made when someone knocked, and someone else finally answered.